When you say that I'm not there, do you mean like you can see the bookcase behind me, but like I'm disappeared?
Yeah,
That's really
you
worrying.
just become transparent. It's really weird. You should probably see a doctor.
I should probably see a doctor. I'm very low in iron.
Welcome to another Thinky Games interview where I'm going to be playing a game and the developers are going to be watching me and talking about how the game was made and all that great stuff. This time, we're going to be playing Paper Trail. I've got two of the developers here with me. Would you like to introduce yourself, folks? Maybe start with Henry.
Sure. Hello, my name is Henry Hoffman. I've been an indie game developer for 15 years or so, somewhere between 12 and 16. I've kind of lost count. Um, but yeah, the last game that I made was called Hue, which was like a side-scrolling puzzle platformer where you can change the background color of the world, and kind of that was quite successful. And based on the back of that success, me and my brother decided to start a new company called Newfangled Games. And I'm technically the CEO of the company, but that's not very it's not a very indie game title. So I kind of do like high level design, I guess you could say. I come up with the game mechanics and work on the game ideas, but also as an indie game developer, I have to do a little bit of everything. So at the moment, I'm doing a lot of audio design. I do all the character art, and I do all the level design basically, and a bunch of different bits in between.
Hello, I'm Fred Hoffman. I'm the art director. I think my role could be summed up more better by younger brother. I get given all the crap jobs which nobody else wants to do.
So CEO and younger brother.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the art director on Paper Trail. So I did all the concept art and then the environment art and all the game art in game and some of the animation stuff and a little bit of UI and bits and bobs. Most of it came from this pen. And before that, I was an illustrator and a textile designer. I first got into games when I did a little bit of asset design for Hue.
Right. Oh, so I was going to ask about that. So you had worked a little bit on Hue together.
Yeah, I worked on Hue. I did the village and the lighthouse and stuff like that.
Okay, very nice. And so, okay. I'm glad
We're
it's
in.
telling me what to do at this point because I'm not sure I'd be able to do it while also talking.
It's a lot of multitasking.
It's good. You know the tutorials work well if you can just do them on autopilot.
Yeah.
So if you worked a little bit on Hue, you worked on other games as well, and what was it like becoming I guess full time on this game?
Yes, it was. It's interesting. So I did a little bit of work on Hue when I was in university for my illustration degree. And what I really liked about working on Hue was that it was a kind of project which you could really get your teeth into. Previously on illustration, all I was getting was you get a long commission is 2 weeks. That's a big illustration project, but usually you have 4 hour, 2 day turnaround kind of things. What I was really liked about games was that it was a thing which you could spend months and months developing a really cool visual style and really leaning into it and really pouring years into a project, which you don't really get that opportunity to in illustration very often.
Rather than lots of little projects, you get to make something big.
Yeah, I was doing editorial stuff and apparel stuff, and those turnarounds are really quick. So it was really nice to turn around and just be able to really, really work on a really long project. It was really fun.
So which way did things happen? Was it Henry was like, oh, I have a genius artist brother, I should use him for my games, or was it Fred going?
I think my mum was like, give your little brother a chance. It's his turn.
I guess how was that conversation when you first started talking about working on this game together?
Yeah, so previously I'd started up a bunch of different companies since university, and it was always about raising project finance and then creating the game and then winding down the company and then doing the same thing again. And I think I'd started 5 different companies in that time. It was getting to the point where I was like, this isn't great for building a sustainable studio. All the interesting people I'm working with and all the talent I'm working with is moving on to other things afterwards, so we're not able to retain any talent. So the idea really, post Hue, was I want to be able to create a sustainable long-term studio where I can attract great talent, and then we can build more ambitious games over time. And really, the idea is that we needed a co-founder essentially that was willing to put in the same amount of time and become as emotionally invested as I was going to be in the game studio as well. And one thing that I really wanted to avoid doing is what I'd done before, is like doing a lot of the art and stuff myself, doing all the programming and stuff myself. So it made complete sense that if Fred was going to be able to come on board as an artist, that we would be able to divide our labor, but also become as emotionally invested and do things like thinkygames.com interviews together and stuff like that, where we can like share the workload and become as equally emotionally invested. Where I think if I was just to approach artists online or to work with like previous collaborators, they would see it just as more of a job, which is completely understandable.
Whereas for Fred, it's his life.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's family. I can choose my friends.
Have there been any struggles?
Well, at the start, it was there was a lot of uncertainty and there was a lot of risk that we were taking on. We were building out a business plan, we were building out a pitch deck, we were building out prototypes, and I wouldn't say we were in over our head, but we were very ambitious with what it was that we were trying to achieve. And we were both working jobs, and we were coming back in the evening and working on business plans together and trying to put pitches together, trying to raise funds, trying to build out prototypes. And all through that time, there was a very real chance that it could not have come together, or it could have come together, but we pushed through during that time. And I think that's you can only really do that as co-founders. You can't really bring people on during that time, as it's too chaotic.
Now I need to get out of this bit again. Oh, here we go. I'm totally gonna get stuck. Like, so
That's good.
It's totally fine. What about the like origin story of the game idea?
Yeah, so around that time, I'd done an incubator called Stugan. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like it was a games incubator based in Sweden where they fly people from all over the world to go to the Swedish woods basically and make a video game for a couple of months. While I was out there, I met this guy called Mario, and he was based in Mexico City, and we became really good friends. And like when we were supposed to fly home, he lost his wallet and then got stranded with me essentially and had to travel around Europe with me. And then afterwards we ended up traveling back to Mexico City, and during that time we were just like doing freelance work, essentially freelance game development. And I think I'd messaged Fred or...
No, I remember I reached out to you. I was applying to do environment art role at a game studio in Sweden, and I sent you my CV and cover letter to look over, and you were like, nah. Let's do something together.
Let's just do it together.
Yeah.
Don't apply for jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the game idea itself was very much like, I think we were just... Fred's very analog based anyway, does a lot of drawing on paper and stuff.
That's a backhanded compliment.
Yeah, it's pretty analog, pretty old school. Yeah, and then I think we were drawing... we can't like figure out exactly who came up with the idea. I think there was like... I think Fred came up with the idea of there being like a game map, and it being like a Metroidvania, and then you fold the game map in order to access different areas, and it becomes more of a Metroidvania style game.
The original one was that you had like a map, you fold it, and then when you look up from the map, the world in front of you had changed to match the folds that you'd made to the map. And then we're like, oh, hang on, that's Kato.
Well, this was before Kato. So.
This was pre-Kato, yeah.
But Kato made a lot more sense than what we were thinking. We were thinking that there was a disconnect between the map and the in-game stuff. So having to switch between those two things didn't have that immediate effects where you knew exactly what you were folding and what the outcome of that was. So what I think one of the ideas I had was zooming it down to it being more of like a grid-based puzzle game. And I think the original idea was that it was going to be a side-scroller.
Yeah, side-scroller platformer.
And so we started messing around with that. But when we experimented with different perspectives, like the top-down perspective became much more interesting because you end up with like these Escher-esque style paths that you can create from rotating the reverse and rotating the front. So top-down suddenly became really interesting, but then it became really boring when it came to like character designs and like environmental design. If everything's like fully top-down, then you just see the tops of characters' heads and stuff like that. So that didn't really work out. So yeah, we came up with like this hybrid perspective where like all the characters and buildings and stuff are front facing, but then all the environment is top down.
It's funny, the art went through, like the design process went through so many iterations, and then this kind of flattened perspective thing kind of arose very organically just from the limitations and the needs of the actual game design, which is really interesting. I really like it when like the mechanic and the limitations of the mechanic are the thing which like informs the art direction.
I think one of the like really strong decisions here as well is to like, you could imagine a version of this where you can like grab any part of the paper and fold it in like any direction, but there's a limit here, which is just like there's the 8 points where you can grab it, and you can't fold. Like you can only drag. Like I can't pull it this way. I can only pull it this way.
Yeah. You can't pull it past itself either, so you can't like fold it beyond itself, if that makes sense. You can't do. Is this a clean napkin? Yeah, it is. Phew.
like this. Yeah. Imagine the horrendous things you'd get if you did that.
Yeah, and there's that, but there's also like double folding as well. So lots of people have asked us like, could you fold the fold again? But and you can get yourself into like really horrendous situations where you've got like cut off game mechanics and stuff like that, and it becomes really fiddly. So for us, it's really important to keep it heavily grid based. So everything snaps to a grid, and then everything can be moved on the direction of the grid, basically. And although we don't have a grid like visibly present, because all the art and everything is like informed by the grid-based limitations, it still feels quite natural when stuff snaps into place.
That was an interesting kind of interaction as well between the design needs and then the art style as well. Like the reason why all the interlocking paths and things work on rotations and everything is because it's a grid-based tile system, but then it has this like hand-rendered rough edges thing where you don't feel like you're looking at a chessboard.
Also, I was going to point out earlier, because I've played an earlier build of this, or like a later build than the demo. I've played a version of the game that's got more stuff in it, but I don't think I've ever played a version that's had this feature, which is the reversing to the other side.
Cool.
To see the other side. Yeah, which is such a nice addition to be able to like figure out what your options are and what's there.
Lets you play with intent, right? Instead of just fold and see.
Yeah, so that must have been a fairly recent feature, right?
Yeah, I think within the last 6 months or so. I think we always knew that we wanted to have it, but I think we never really understood how important it would be for players to use to solve puzzles. And also, like, players can kind of choose when to use it as well. So one thing we're building out at the moment is an additional hint system that players can choose when to use. But it's quite nice because this map of the reverse like feature, we call it map of the reverse, but it's not really a map of the reverse. It's just like seeing the reverse. But yeah, players can choose when to use it, and it's usually like they come into a puzzle and they're like, right, I'm going to try and solve it in my head. I'll look at the reverse and I'll piece it together, and then they play through, it works out really well so far.
I should do that right now. There's the reverse. I can find the one. It's so convenient to be able to do that. I should do that more often. So I was going to ask Fred, what's it like to have to draw all the sides of these pieces of paper?
Yeah, it's a deceptively massive amount of drawing which has to happen. Especially since putting in map of the reverse. So now that you can click through and see the back has to be like nicely composed and well laid out and not overly cluttered and like just look as pretty as the front sides basically. Yeah. Previously, there were massive areas of the back sides which you couldn't see because it's a bit like trying to scratch the middle of your back. There are parts where it's literally impossible to see completely just by folding.
Yeah, like the bits in the middle where you're like trying to fold it. And you're like trying to
exactly.
See
you can't see
bit.
that.
Yeah,
and you can only see like small sections. So when we introduced the map of the reverse mechanic, I had to go through every single level in the game. And then redesign and repaint and make new assets for like even here like there's a whole different background to this scene.
Oh yeah, and it's like it's its own like whole thing basically.
And people never see it as well because they never look at the reverse of these end levels.
Yeah, but if they do, and it's just like a messy like unfinished bit, like you just have to do every single one just in case. And then like the more like decorative the scene, the more important it is. And there are like some really nice kind of unseen little art things that happen there where you may have a statue on the front and then when you map over the reverse it's a different statue with a different expression in exactly the same place, so it kind of does like a flipping animation,
like a little Easter egg of some sort for people who look on the back.
Yeah, there's some interesting little things which are hidden which you wouldn't necessarily know otherwise.
Oh wait, hold on, so that's interesting because that is like a flipped version. Well, it's not. Wait, yeah, it is. It's like we're seeing the paper. We're seeing through the paper rather than...
Yeah, exactly.
You're seeing through it. Otherwise, it gets really confusing when you're trying to line things up. And if you try and imagine the flip, it gets way more confusing.
Yeah.
So it's more like you're looking through the paper rather than turning it around.
Yeah, and it's way easier to be like, oh, I can see a thing that I need in that corner. I'll just drag that corner down.
So originally, we were coming up with different ways of looking at the UI for the map of the reverse, and we were thinking of having like an X-ray, and we were already overthinking it basically and overdoing it. But we were going to have like a map of the walkable. This is why it's called map of the reverse. A map of the walkable area in like a blueprint, and then the world would fade away, and then the white drawn map would come through.
And it was really visually complicated because that was overlaying over the front that you could see.
Right, I see. So then you suddenly were seeing like the paths on this side and that
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
kind of confusing.
It's like, what?
And then another thing we tried with is the flipping of the paper, and to make it feel more tactile, like the paper actually flips around, but then you because it's flipped, you lose full perspective of where everything is, and it's more of a hindrance than it is a help. So it's funny because this is probably one of the simplest ways to implement this feature, but it was one of the ones we did last. Because for some reason we were overcomplicating it essentially.
You're trying to be too clever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the story of our development cycle. It's like, how can we make this as difficult for ourselves as possible?
Go back to like art style. Like, what I'm curious about inspirations and things. What were you looking at when coming up with this visual aesthetic?
So we were looking at loads and loads and loads of things. There's suddenly I have a GIF somewhere of the amount of art styles that we cycled through before we landed on this. Again, a lot of it was born from the needs of the game. It needs to be clear and not too cluttered and concise and work well on small resolutions and large resolutions. But a lot of it comes from my background in textile design. So
Right.
previously, I was worked in screen printing and lithography, and a big part of that when you're preparing images is that you work with very few amounts of colors, and you work in flat shapes. So all like the shading and everything is like there's never more than 4 or 5 tones of any single color, and they're all painted flat. So you get this like nice painterly aesthetic, and so it takes from like screen printing and textile
It's
design.
really nice, and I guess there's like a paper texture as well over everything as well.
Yeah, the paper texture. Yeah, the magic paper texture, which brings it all together.
That's definitely my crutch from when it comes to aesthetic design. You'll notice it in a lot of my games. It's just like, oh, throw in a paper texture, and it looks loads better now.
Suddenly it's beautiful. Suddenly it's got loads
Handmade.
of detail.
Yeah.
It's interesting on this puzzle here that I just did. It's interesting because it's so tempting to think like, I got to get here. I got to get onto this platform, but no, the actual exit's on the other side. I was like, how can I possibly?
But that is actually a stage that you have to get through in order to get to the next stage. So that was kind of a deliberate design intention, putting that there. So you think you've got to get there, and then you're in the correct place in order to exit out of the correct exit.
Yeah, so
Right,
there are
that
like
makes
2
sense.
lessons which you learn during that. The first lesson is you learn that you can drag yourself whilst you're standing on the platform, and then the next lesson is that you learn that you can drag over the fold. So it's like sequentially unveiling more and more information.
So talking about lessons in puzzles, are you like there's like a kind of common puzzle design philosophy that like basically each puzzle should like teach a lesson or an idea or something. There should be something in there. Is that how you approach puzzle design as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that we look at it is we introduce a new mechanic. So the objective of that is to teach the player like how to utilize that new mechanic. And then generally the way that we do the next puzzle is by building complexity on that mechanic, either by just making it more complicated or by combining with a previous mechanic that the player is already aware of. And then we'll do like a really difficult level, and that will be challenging. And then we'll do a bit of a dip, which is like learning a new mechanic again. So there's like this rhythm of difficulty that flows all the way through. All the way through, we're teaching the player like new ways that they can interact with the mechanics that they're learning, essentially. And I think some of the challenges we faced are making puzzles way too difficult from the outset. I think that's probably been the biggest lesson that we've learned.
Right.
Particularly in this environment, some of the levels that we had at the end were so difficult that it would take us like 40 minutes to solve.
We knew the solution, but we like still just like pay, and we had to test them as well. So we'd load up swamps, and we'd be like, "Oh my goodness!" We get to that one level, we'd be like, "I completely forgot about this one."
So did you just start like cutting out puzzles, or did you start simplifying them? What was your approach to fixing them and making them a bit more approachable?
Usually there was a good idea in these complicated puzzles somewhere. There was a good intention in there. But I think what the trap that we fell into regularly was like, oh, this complicated puzzle, let's just simplify it a little bit, or let's like try. And when you're just like working at something that is too fundamentally overcomplicated, you don't really make any progress. So generally our approach was like, okay, there's a good idea in there. Let's start again from scratch, basically, and build it simpler from the offset. But one of the things that we did is we worked with a playtesting team, basically. And we were like, if a level takes longer than 15 minutes, log it as something that's too complicated, basically. And then there was huge amounts of problematic levels that we were able to identify. That seems to be like an appropriate level of difficulty that players really respond to. There's not too many people saying it's too easy, and there's not too many people getting completely stuck. And that's kind of like the area that we want to be in.
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, well, those are all the easiest levels. So now we need to simplify all the other levels that are in the full game, basically.
Sometimes it's so funny looking at the reverse of the paper, realizing there's not that much there. I thought in my head, I was imagining there was like so much stuff.
Yeah, when you're folding over the edges, like generally all the complexity like aligns around the edges of the paper, because those are the only bits that interact with the front side. So suddenly you've got like a big empty space nearly all of the time in the middle of the paper.
So I was going to mention, I really love that, like, you introduced the mechanic with the dots, like almost the domino dots on the platforms in the previous chapter. And then here you've got the moving platforms. And at first you don't, at least I don't think like, oh, those are going to get combined in some way. And then to see them combined here and actually be interesting when they're combined is really interesting.
We have like a matrix of mechanics, and then we have like an interoperability matrix where we have different ones and see how they connect, and we have like little notes on whether or not there's interesting interactions there which can be done. And yeah, the dominoes were, remember when we first thought of them, it was like a real brainwave moment, and we're like, oh my goodness, this is cooler than the folding.
Yeah. And players really respond to the dominoes specifically because it actually is kind of a guide, because the players then know that the different numbers have to line up, and it's like an extra layer of guidance essentially as to where the folds have to go. And I think that introducing those in the first environment was like a really good idea in hindsight, although it wasn't intentional, because it really teaches the players how to fold and how to line things up as well.
Also, they make like a satisfying sound. People really like the clonk sound, and like the little, there's like a little like short gameplay loop, dopamine, Candy Crush style thing. Which
Right, you're going for the Candy Crush.
Totally what we're going for.
Totally what we're going for.
Exactly.
You have to, every fold is a microtransaction.
I saw on your social media, like there was a clip of a streamer like trying to pet a cat in some part of the game, and being sad that they couldn't. I assume that went straight to the top of the to-do list.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and we noticed it from conferences as well. I think actually, out of all the things that are going to impact public reception to the game, I think not being able to pet the cat is probably one of the highest.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because everyone tries to do it, and everyone is annoyed when it doesn't work. So it's definitely something we're going to add for sure.
Where am I going? Probably.
This is probably the hardest puzzle in the demo, I reckon. But it's funny. It's funny how much easier it is now than what it was. With like massive.
Oh my goodness, it was so hard before.
There's an interesting thing of like not knowing whether like am I going straight there or am I going over to this side? Like I'm trying to like figure out what my looking at the back, there's not that much stuff as per usual.
It's funny how often those things can be reused in different ways because of the different angles at which you can fold them. Like a single platform gets like a lot of use and reuse in terms of how many ways it can reconnect.
Yeah, I try and use that as like part of the design strategy. In the level that I'm designing at the moment, I just have this tiny platform on the reverse that is used on 3 different sides, I think. Because then it feels much more interesting when you're reusing something that you were like, oh, that's clearly for this purpose. Oh, it can also be used for this purpose and this purpose if it's rotated or folded in a different way. Then it becomes more interesting. Although I don't know if players actually notice that because it's just like, oh, I'm just folding this corner, and then they forget that they previously used it. I don't know. But as a designer, I find it satisfying being able to add that in, the reuse of different platforms.
Might need a hint. Do I need a hint?
No hints allowed.
No hints? Oh, no.
Also, because we actually can't remember how to solve this one, so we couldn't do if we wanted to.
Oh, this is there. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. So you just mentioned you're still designing levels?
Yeah, still designing levels. Pretty close to...
Redesigning levels.
Yeah, it's more like redesigning levels, because we had all the content in, and then we did a lot of playtesting, and then we had a lot of redesigns based on that. But then one thing that we did recently is we realized that the ocean environment needed like an interesting new kind of WoW mechanic, which we've been working on, and that adding, like, you know how it is with a puzzle game, you introduce a new mechanic that has like knock-on implications for levels afterwards, but also that entire environment. So that required like a considerable amount of redesign in order to accommodate those mechanics. And then the next environment also required like a fair amount of redesign. And it was totally worth it because the levels are so much better now than what they were. But yeah, no, it was a lot of work, and we're still working on redesign stuff at the moment.
So that's the like mirror mechanic that you showed.
Yeah, so it's like the classic puzzle light beam mechanic. But one thing that we realized in the cathedral environment that we were doing previously is we've got these power line mechanics. We thought they were cool, but we didn't think they were like the best. They were a bit janky, which is one of the reasons I think it tarnished my view of them at the time, because they were really complicated to implement. But now that all the jankiness is fixed, and yeah, when the players were playing through it, it was their favorite environment by far because they love this power line mechanic. And the way that it works basically is like you can illuminate these power lines, and then you can match them across the reverse of the paper, and then it goes round, and then you can open doors and things like that. But what players really responded to is like cool mechanics that like snake around the reverse of the paper and on the front of the paper and stuff. So we were like, what's another mechanic that we can build on that does something similar to that? And for us, it was like these light beams that travel across the paper, but then you can bounce them around. So that has that similar level of satisfaction. But in many ways, I think it's even better than the power lines, pending playtesting. We'll see what they say. But I think
yeah, that's true. Optimistic.
As you mentioned, you're like having to update later levels. I think the ocean levels before the power lines one. Is that right?
No, it's the ocean is after. So we've got the ocean environment, and then after that we have the city environment. So luckily, it's just the two end environment. So it's relatively painless. If it was the start, it would be a nightmare.
I know. Have you been working in puzzles that like incorporate both of them in the latter of those two environments?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the power lines mechanic lends itself really well to like indoor environments because they basically snake along the ground. But suddenly you come to the ocean environment and it's lots of these little disparate islands with lots of negative space in between. So that mechanic really does, and it's the same with city. You're on rooftops and there's lots of like space in between. So that mechanic doesn't lend itself very well because there's nowhere for the power lines to be grounded. So really we were like, okay, well, how can we do a twist on the power lines? And kind of the light beams was that twist, I guess, even though they're quite different mechanics. But that's definitely something that I found as a personal challenge, because as a puzzle designer, I want to like introduce a new mechanic, I want to build on it, and I want to combine it with previous mechanics. But one thing that we found with Paper Trail in particular is that some environments just lend themselves really well to a certain mechanic,
right,
and then you just have to lean into that mechanic for that environment, basically. Right. And then maybe a later environment won't have the recombining mechanics with that mechanic as you would kind of want to as a puzzle design purist.
We have a lot of mechanics.
Yeah, we do have a lot of mechanics. But like, how do I take the good things from that mechanic and then apply it to a different mechanic which works better in the environment later on?
I mean, even in this demo, we're seeing a lot of mechanics.
No, that was one thing we wanted to do with the demo. The previous demo was just a very large amount of caves, right? And we wanted to show like a breadth of environment and a breadth of... because on paper, the folding mechanic sounds like it could be quite limiting, or like there's not that much that you could do with it. But we wanted to show just like a brief overview of just how many things it interoperates with and how much scope there is for interesting and unexpected interactions.
I'm curious, like, how many mechanics you had that you threw away. Like you said, you had like a matrix of like interactions between the mechanics.
Oh, we had some crazy things.
Yeah.
Oh, the frogs.
The frogs. Oh man, I wish we got the frogs. I'm still sour about that.
Tell me about the frogs. I want to know.
Yeah, we this was the weirdest game mechanic, and I
don't
don't
really
really
which I came up with, and it's the one we scrapped.
Oh, yeah, was it the one that you came up with?
It was one I came up with.
That makes sense.
So we'd have these frogs that you could click on, and if you clicked on them, they'd spit their tongue out in front of them. And there would be mosquitoes on the reverse of the paper.
I see.
And you'd have to fold over the mosquitoes to align them in front of the frogs. And then when you click the frog and he'd stuck his tongue out, he'd eat the mosquito, and then he'd swell up, and then you'd be able to push him around like a boulder.
I see.
And I've got some really great animations of like frogs which like swell up, and then you roll them around, and they'd make like squelching sounds.
Save that for the next game. Whatever the next game is, that's going
to be... That's just gonna be the next game. And then we had tightropes.
Oh yeah, tightropes. I forgot about that.
We were gonna have like 2 anchor points, and you'd be able to draw a line with your finger between the 2 anchor points, and you'd like connect a rope, and then you'd be able to walk across it. So you'd have to fold the anchor points to be close enough, and then when there was like a line connecting them, the paper folds would be locked. So there was all sorts of interesting things.
The reason that one didn't work is because it broke the grid, essentially, because you could have like a connection like at point 1 and then a connection which was like 3 across and then 1 up, and then suddenly you're no longer adhering to the grid, and then if you're folding over and lining stuff up, you kind of lose that satisfaction because what are you lining this tightrope up with? There's nothing to line it up with, essentially.
And it was movement was a real issue as well, because if you had a fold in between and then you were approaching it at an angle, it was preserving that angle of motion across the projected fold, and all of that stuff was like. So we told our programmer that we had this idea, and he just spat at us. It became something much more intuitive. It became teleporting doors eventually, because the idea was that you click on one side of the rope, and then you'd walk across to the other side, and it was basically teleporting from one to the other, and that ended up being repackaged as doorways, where when you fold over and uncover another doorway, the doors both open, and then you can teleport through from one to the other.
Yeah, so mechanically it's the same, but the treatment is completely different and much easier to implement.
Yeah, and much easier to read as well. Like, you walk through a door, you come out of the door. It's pretty straightforward. Although there was a really cool twist of it, which we thought was really cool, and then people didn't enjoy that much in playtesting. which was if you had a door on the reverse side and you folded it over on the corner, so it got folded over at an angle.
Yeah.
Then when you walk through this door, you'd come out this one, and the whole world would rotate to match the orientation of the door, and that made people feel sick.
Players found it really disorienting. So one of the things that they really value is knowing where they are in the world and where they have to go.
Just like in real life.
Yeah, it just gets thrown out, and players have no concept of where they are, whether they're going up, down, left, right, backwards, or anything really.
Yeah.
So the way that we limited that essentially is like we didn't want to remove that functionality because it's like a nice wow moment. But whenever you do rotate the world, the only way that you can progress is rotating the world back again. So it kind of locks you into a little area where there's a collectible or something like that, and then you have to rotate out of it.
It's funny. It's ended up being like the most extra mechanic for pretty much just getting collectibles.
I see.
It's like really a massive amount of like programming and design oversight, and then it's like we're just going to use this for collectibles.
Oh, this star is stumping me. I'm gonna have to leave this for.
I like the way that if you're standing over it and then you map with the reverse, it just taunts you by showing you that it's like underneath your silhouette, but you can't.
Right, I see. If I was standing right there.
So one of the things with the stars as well is they were kind of placeholder collectibles for our new collectible system that we're building at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So the idea is that throughout the game world, there's little pieces of origami, these little origami animals that you can find that are connected to the environment. And basically, I think each environment has about 5 of them. And then you've got like a collectibles menu where you can go in and then you can see all the different origami you've collected in the game and what they all mean.
Right. So speaking of things that are like in the main game that are not in the demo, I've seen a little bit of it, so that there's like more of a like narrative in the story, right? I remember in the build that I played, there was like the kind of bonfire town place.
Yeah.
So I think, as far as I understand, there's kind of 2 things that you're doing, right? There's like those sections that are like little story beats where you're walking around, but there's also cutscenes as well. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing with those?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we wanted to do is have like voiceover from the main character in the game, and we wanted to like tell those through cutscenes. The way that I did it in Hue was that there was these long corridor sections where you would get dialogue given to you, and it was a little bit boring. There was a lack of replayability there. It was just like essentially walking through a space while you were being talked at. So one of the things we wanted to explore here was like, we want to have cutscenes, but what if we repurpose the core mechanic of the game and turn them into foldable cutscenes?
Mm-hmm.
And we thought it would be kind of interesting is if you've got an illustrated graphic on the back, an illustrated graphic on the front, and then you fold them over, and then it forms like some sort of new image of some sort. We were like, oh, that could be really interesting, and maybe we could tell a story. And maybe when you fold over, then the inside image changes, and then you unfold, and then it's different, and we could tell kind of a story this way. So we've got between each environment, there's like these 3 different pieces of paper, all with different hand-illustrated story beats, essentially. And as you play through, it divulges voiceover from the main character. And it's all about, essentially, Paige, who is the main character.
Oh, it's voiceover.
Yeah. There's Paige, who's the main character in the game, is so she's grew up in a village, and her family are kind of overprotective because of something that happened mysteriously in the past.
Right.
But she's got a letter from university accepting her, basically, to further her studies. So she decides to run away from home, and this entire adventure is her coming to terms with the fact that she has this mysterious ability to fold space and time as she kind of goes to university and deals with the fact that reconciling with her family, essentially. That's kind of the overarching goal.
Getting out of your small town and reconciling with your family, which both me and Henry did.
So it's autobiographical. That's what I'm saying.
Semi-autobiographical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's also been a real challenge because we haven't really seen anything done quite like this before. So it's been interesting trying to tell a story and tell a narrative through this medium of paper folding. I think it's come together really well.
Yeah, it's coming together really well. It's some work to be done there.
Really well, yeah.
But I guess that whenever you add an interactive element to cutscenes and things like that, is that you don't know how fast the player is going to go through, and then if they're going through really fast, like how does that affect the timing of the VO and everything else? And suddenly there's a lot of like complicated curation of like different things that are going on in order for everything to line up perfectly in terms of timing.
Here's one thing I want to ask. So, Paper Trail's coming to Netflix, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, for somebody who like me, who's like, wait, Netflix is it's for TV shows, right? Please explain to me, how does this work?
Yeah, so Netflix Games has launched sort of a game subscription service, essentially, where if you've got a Netflix account, you can log into your iOS and Android device, basically, and they have like a plethora of really awesome premium games, some of the best releases of this and last year, available for you to kind of log in and just download for free, essentially, if you've got that subscription.
Right, so do you have the Netflix app on your phone and you get them through the app?
You don't even need the app necessarily. You can still get it through the native iOS or Android app store. You can just search for the games and download them. It's only when you launch the games that you need to log into your Netflix account in order to play the games, essentially.
And how is it playing? Because it feels like it would work really well, like this kind of tactile game where you're dragging the piece of paper. How is it playing this game on mobile?
Yeah, so like the core interaction works really well. Like the dragging the paper and everything, that is like perfectly suited to like touchscreen devices. I think one of the design challenges that we faced is that we've been building this for Steam and for consoles and stuff as well. So as the levels get more complicated and bigger and more ambitious, and there's a lot of content that you're trying to fit onto the screen, and then when you shrink that down to smaller screens, that's when it becomes a bit of a challenge.
Suddenly you can't see Fred's beautiful art.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a blessing.
Best viewed from a distance.
So that's definitely a change. It plays like perfectly on an iPad, or like an Android tablet, like really really nicely.
It's in part of the design path that we're doing. As we're simplifying more complex levels, it also serves the purpose of making them more mobile friendly at the same time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess by making things clearer for mobile, you potentially just making things clearer in general as well.
We had some levels which were so complicated they looked messy on 4K TVs. So.
Right. A couple of last questions. One is, have you two been playing any puzzle games lately, or like it doesn't have to be a recent game? Anything you'd recommend? Favorite games, whatever.
It seems like I always seem to be playing things only at conferences when I'm there and walking around playing other people's
games. Right, once
games.
it's your job, that's all you can do.
Yeah, that's true. Viewfinder was amazing. That's launched recently. That's come out. That was incredible. Similar world-bending, mind-bending kind of approach which I really liked. I was really surprised by was how well they were able to make the puzzle solutions feel intuitive when you feel like you've got infinite control over your world around you. That's similar to what we were trying to do as well.
A game that I played recently, which is not out, but I played at Develop Conference, is a game called 30 Birds. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
I've played a little bit of it, yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I really love that. And there's a lot of parallels with what we're doing in Paper Trail there. For example, like in the game, like there's a lot of preparing for a big festival, where there's like the summoning of like a bird god basically, and in our like autumnal bonfire village place is almost identical. There's a big phoenix in the fire. Everyone's preparing for a festival.
So all indie developers, we all share the same brain cell.
Turns out you're not so original after all.
Yeah,
exactly. But they're also like navigating like this 3D space with 2D characters, so there's definitely some parallels there in terms of like how to do mechanic design stuff. So.
And it has a really beautiful art style as well, right?
Yeah. And I'm jealous of how many characters they've managed to design and animate. Like, just in the festival, there must be like 40 characters that you can talk to, and they all have their dialogue and they all have all their animations. I'm like, man, how do you do all that character animation? It's crazy.
So much work.
Yeah. So, Hue was a game about like colour. Paper Trails about paper. I'm noticing a kind of arts and crafts theme to all this.
Yeah,
Do you think
yeah.
that'll stick with you with the next project?
Look out for the next PVA glue-based game.
I was going to suggest papier-mâché.
Oh yeah, there we go.
That's cool.
I think there was a game called Papier. I think it was called
maybe.
Papier, which was like an.
Oh yeah.
It was the IGF art winner, I think.
Yeah, it won, didn't
and that had an amazing, like, I think it was actually papercraft, but it felt like it was all paper mache and it was all made in real life and turned into an interesting game.
Stop motion. It's like stop motion paper slices that are all lit. That was amazing.
I guess there's something appealing about like kind of physical crafty things and making puzzles out of them.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't know if that's kind of necessarily the direction that we'll go in, because the space that we're operating in now is very much my comfortable design space. It's like coming up with a core game mechanic that maybe hasn't been done before, and then building out everything out from that. I think for the next project, we would like to kind of break outside of that comfort, I guess, a little bit, and try and do something a bit more potentially ambitious, whilst also having broad appeal. So one thing I would love to do is add like gamier elements that appeal to potentially more hardcore gamers, whether that's like meta game stuff or progression or something like that, because it's something I personally am very unfamiliar with and would love to learn more about, and to build something outside of that, just coming up with puzzle after puzzle based on a core mechanic.
Essentially, we want to trick more people into the genre.
That's a good idea.
I'm really looking forward to moving on to future projects and seeing if I can draw in a different style, as I've been doing this now for 3 years. I'm like, can I do anything other than flat color?
Any styles you're thinking of?
Yeah, I've got some ideas that I really want to try out. I'm really looking forward to moving into 2.5 or 3D and bringing flat shapes and flat textures into 3D space. And
yeah, so a tool that I really like at the moment is so I've been using Blender basically since I was about 12 years old. Love Blender.
yes, a grease pencil.
Yeah, but the Blender grease pencil and some of the like hand-drawn animation stuff that they're able to achieve in 3 dimensions, I think is super cool. And I haven't really seen that translate over to Unity very well yet. So or 3D games or like real-time engines in general. So I'd love to explore, especially because Fred's got like quite a hand-drawn aesthetic with some of his stuff, whether we can carry that over to 3D, and then whether we can create some sort of interesting world building using that style. That would be super cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you both. I look forward to that project in the future, and for when Paper Trail's out, we can all play it. Yeah, thanks for joining me.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.